Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Knitting House podcast. I'm Claudia and I've got a few things to show you. Mostly whips. Do just take your expectations and dial them down a few notches and a few more. You ready? Let's go. I feel like at this point I don't have to introduce much anymore, but if you're not familiar with what this channel is and who I am, just look at the other videos. Oh, you know what, actually? One thing that I feel like I haven't mentioned yet in any of my videos, but I should, is the profanity warning. I've had a few comments on that, and I do get comments on my Booktube channel as well. Every time I swear, I don't tend to swear a lot, but I do swear, so don't watch this with your children around unless you want them to grow up into horribly potty-mouthed adults. Let's get started with the actual knitting, which is what we're all here for. I have finished one thing since the last podcast, and it is the most dull and uninteresting thing I have ever knit, this hat. This is a hat that I made for the purposes of wearing under my bike helmet, because my ears get very cold when I cycle, and I made a headband, which I showed in the first or second episode, but I also thought for those colder days I would also make a hat. The yarn is extremely cheap and not particularly pretty looking sock yarn that I bought in Woolworth when I went to visit my parents. It was in the sale for €1. And then I knit this up on 2.75mm needles. I started making this on the train back and then finished it in front of the TV. There literally is nothing I can say about this that would make it in any way interesting. It's a 1x1 rib. Oh, this is unblocked, hence why it's looking a little bit scraggly. It's a 1x1 rib that then goes into a stockinette body, and then just really basic decreases at the crown. Still learning knitting terminology here. It's probably useful if I show you what it looks like on. It looks like a hat. Spoilers. There we go. It's not super flattering. It's not super interesting, but it does keep my ears warm under the bike helmet. Do I need to show you this with the helmet on? I mean, I might as well. Never mind, the bike helmet is in the garage and I cannot be asked to go and get it. This is not going to see a lot of wear this year because as we speak it's starting to become spring, it's starting to warm up a little bit, and so I don't expect I'll be wearing this until the upcoming autumn. So what I'm going to do with this is block it and then put it away in a box with all of my other winter stuff. So I did want to take the opportunity and talk about where the hell is my hair stick gone? Where did I put it? Where did I put it? You saw it. Where did I put it? Found it. I did want to take the opportunity and talk about functional knits a little bit, because a lot of the things that we make, you know, I'm not excluding myself from that, is luxurious and decorative and made from really nice yarn and meant to be treasured and cherished and shown off. But knitting is, at its core, also a very functional way to make certain garments, and hats. Certainly one of the most functional things you can knit, because a hand-knitted hat with a double-folded brim, like the one that I just showed you, is the best way to keep your ears warm. And I realized the value of hand-knitted garments, the core value of having something made from wool that's warm, really genuinely warm. I discovered that when my husband and I moved into this very old house last winter, and it didn't have any heating for a whole year. So we made it through a winter in Germany with no heating at all, absolutely nothing. And wearing home knitted jumpers, socks, fingerless gloves, hats and scarves made it so much more bearable. Even as I was sitting in my home, like at my computer, wearing gloves and a hat and a jumper over like 2 thermal layers, I really learned to value just the practicality of knitting and knitting with wool specifically. Even though something like this is not particularly pretty or exciting, I know that this is something I'm going to value and treasure in a whole different way to something pretty and dainty that I made, like the sort of things that I'm going to show you coming up. Of course, then there's nothing that says you can't make your knits both practical and pretty, but in this case, I didn't really want to spend any particular effort on, say, colour work or a huge amount of money on really nice yarn. I wanted something that was sturdy, so sock yarn is just perfect, and I wanted something that is rustic and that is cheap, because this is going to be stressed, because I'll be wearing this under my bike helmet. That means that it's not going to have just friction against my head, but there's also going to be a whole other thing pressing down on it. It's going to get washed a lot because it'll get sweaty. It'll really need to withhold washing conditions. And knowing me, I might just lose it somewhere because that sort of thing happens. And so, yeah, not exciting, but useful. And that's something I need to remind myself of more often. But the next thing I'm knitting is actually gorgeous. So let me show you that. And that is a whip that I already started, that I already showed you in the last episode. It's the Helia sweater by Joanna Ang, and I've gotten quite a bit further in that. So this is a top-down raglan that has a plain stockinette body with a bit of a detail on the side. So under the arms, the body has a twisted rib detail on each side. Don't know if you can see. But the body's mostly stockinette. All the detail is in the sleeves, which have a really beautiful cable and twisted rib pattern. How beautiful are these sleeves? Just stunning. Here you can see the twisted rib increases, which are a bit of a pain in the ass to knit because you have to bother with like make one pearls and things like that. But the effect is indubitably gorgeous, as is the cable. Now, this is not an error-free cable by any means. There are mistakes in there, but I think for the most part, I've done all right so far. So I split for the sleeves. I've knit maybe 10 centimeters of the body. So I'm going to just continue knitting the body and then pick up the sleeves. I was considering briefly whether to stop knitting the body and do the sleeves first, but in the end I decided to just follow the pattern. When you do the yoke, you do a lot of these really complicated cables and increases and you know, the pattern, you follow the chart and whatever. So this is a little bit of relaxation before we get back into the hardcore stuff. The yarn I'm using for this is a strand of Drops brushed alpaca silk, which I bought when it was on offer, like everyone else did, and a strand of my street yarn, which has already reduced in size, but I have loads more where that came from. This is a yarn that I suspect is wool that I found on the street in a box to give away. And I was a little bit worried about knitting with this at first because it's incredibly fragile, it breaks very easily. However, I have not had a single breakage when working this double with the brushed alpaca silk. So here's a little tip for you. If you have a yarn that's really fragile, using a double with a sturdier yarn, so far I've had no issues with that. And I actually have, even after I finished this one and the other 2 little balls that I wound from that, I still have a whole enormous hank of that waiting to be rolled up into balls. So I've basically got another jumper quantity of this black woolly street yarn. So, you know, you'll see that one again in the future. Really enjoying this knit so far. Joanna Ang's pattern writing is top notch. It's descriptive where it needs to be, but never uses more detail than you need, and it makes good use of references. So you've got the main bits of the pattern really compact on the page, but then she also uses references, so you can look at other pages for more detailed descriptions and annotations and whatever. It's just so much effort has gone into writing this pattern that it makes it a real joy to knit, even though for me, as someone who's not an advanced knitter, it's a bit daunting with all them cables, but so far I have not had any issues. There hasn't been a single bit where I thought I didn't quite understand something, which is just a wonderful experience. At the end of this, I'm going to have a really beautiful jumper, and I'll have had a lot of fun knitting it. Highly recommend the Helia sweater in particular, and it's certainly not the only Joanna Ang jumper I'm going to make. I've already been eyeing some of her other designs, but you know, let's take this slow and finish this jumper first. Let's move on then. The next whip I want to show you is one that wasn't in fact there last episode. Oh, let's just tidy up here a little bit. Oh, what I've got here, by the way, is my work baskets. So this one is where I put my larger works. So this has got all of the yarn that I haven't used yet, and the work itself, and the tools, such as the ever important cable needle. And it also usually has the pattern in it, but that is who knows where. Probably in front of the telly on the coffee table. So anyway, that's the basket that I keep my larger works in. And then I also have two of these little felt baskets for smaller works. And one of them is currently occupied by what is not recognizable as such, but what is the Summer Secret Prop by Jessie Maed Designs. And this is a very popular pattern. It's free, and it's something I've made before once, but never worn, because the previous one that I made, I kind of used the wrong yarn. I used like a sock yarn that was kind of scratchy, and it was both too scratchy and too warm. So for this one, I have chosen this sort of nondescript 70% cotton, 30% polyester mix. That is a black and white ply, do you call it like that? It's the first time knitting with a cotton yarn. I nicked this from my mum, that's why I don't know what it is or where it came from. It's not particularly sort of high quality or whatever, but I really like how it looks. I'm making a few modifications to this pattern. For one, I'm making this quite a bit bigger than the pattern wants me to make. This is a negative ease pattern. However, if my calculations are correct, then this should turn out to be very little positive ease. So it should have a few centimeters of positive ease. Just because I want something a little more flowy. I'm also not making it quite as cropped. The original pattern is extremely cropped. Like, we're talking like the boobage is covered but not much else. However, I'm making this a little bit longer simply by increasing the distance between the body increases. So this is obviously knit bottom up, and you start with the rib, and then you just knit in stockinette, and it tells you to increase every 5 centimeters. I'm increasing every like 6.5-ish centimeters, which overall is going to make the body of this longer. So overall it's going to be a little looser and a little longer. I really like the fabric that this is making. It took me a little bit of swatching to get to that point, because I started first with a needle size up. This, I believe, is knit on... Oh, I hate wooden needles where the size just wears off. Fairly certain these are 4 millimeter needles. So I swatched this on 4.5 millimeters first, and then went down to the 4 millimeter needles. And it still makes a really drapey fabric that also doesn't feel too heavy. So I've used up about 100, just over 100 grams. I think overall this top is going to be around 250 grams. So not even outrageously heavy, and certainly airy enough to be useful as a summer top for when it's actually warm. I'm just going to continue knitting this. This has been put it on the back burner a little bit since I got to the body of the Helia sweater, because I like to knit while I watch TV, like many people do, but I don't really watch a huge amount of TV. So I would say on most days, I watch something in the evening, not every day, but on most days. And the Helia sweater has become the preferred knit at the moment, purely for the reason that I want to finish it before it's too late to wear it at least once. If I finish this in like June and it's boiling hot already, then I'll be very disappointed, because I want to wear this out at least a couple of times before I put it away with the winter things. So the crop top has a little bit more of a longer time frame before I want it finished. But yeah, really pleased with how this is turning out. I really like the black and white fabric, and it's just a sort of easy, relaxing, really not very complicated knit. I think perfectly suited if you have never knitted a summer top before, because there's so little investment that goes into it. It's a free pattern, it doesn't use up much yarn, and it doesn't use up a whole lot of your time. Oh, a little interlude, because I haven't actually mentioned what I'm wearing, although I'm sure everyone has recognized this. This is the Felix jumper. This is probably the earliest jumper I still wear. So the very first attempts at making jumpers have long been unraveled and turned into other things, mostly cat beds and scarves and things like that. However, this is a jumper I made some years ago that I still wear, though mostly around the house. It's just a beginner jumper, you know. I made some mistakes in the construction, the sleeve length, the fit, but it's not horrendous, and so I do actually still wear them. And I thought, why not show you something that is a bit amateurish? Because we all have things like that, don't we? Now I wanted to talk about what I want to cast on next, and that is a pair of socks. I normally have a pair of socks on the go, which again I think is fairly typical. So I normally have a pair of socks on the go at all times, but that was replaced by the hat, which was made on sock needles and so on. So now that I've finished this, I want to start another pair of socks. And as we are going into summer, I want to make some shorty socks. However, I'm not going to buy any new like summery sock yarn just yet, even though I am itching to get my hands on some lightweight sock yarns. Like I've seen so many socks that have got like silk or cotton added, or you know, just that are made for summer socks, and I'm really desperate to try them, but I'm being boring and sensible, and I have so much sock yarn scraps that I just cannot justify the purchase. And so I'm going to knit up some of those scraps first and then indulge maybe later in the summer. The pattern that I have been wanting to make, and it's not so much a pattern as like one of those that's sort of a suggestion, it's free and everything. It's called the Textured Short Socks, and it's by Knits Please. These are very basic seed stitch socks, so a little bit more interesting than just a straight stockinette sock, but not that much more labor intensive. So for that, I am planning to use my tiniest sock needles. These are 2mm sock needles, which I did actually look up the US size, and they are a size 0. So a US size 0 sock needle, absolutely minuscule, dainty little things with a very long cable, because I bought these to try out making socks 2 at a time, which I did. Here's the result. So this is a previous pair of socks I made with those exact needles. I'm going to be honest here, I was a little embarrassed when I pulled these out of the sock drawer. Even though these are clean, they show very obvious signs of wear. They haven't felt it, they've peeled a bit, they haven't felt it or anything, but the discoloration is not pretty. And I debated with myself for a moment whether to actually show these or not, but then I thought, you know what? These are socks that are being worn. These are very clearly worn and loved. I wear them inside my boots, and so the sole of them goes grey. Top of them isn't, so I should probably show you this side. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the sort of fabric that you get from these tiny, tiny sock needles. I love it. I love the way these look. These are so fine in terms of the fabric you get. This is not made from a pattern. This is just a really basic 2x2 rib. I did 1 row of pearls just to get that line there because I wanted to see how that looks. And then a basic heel flap and gusset heel. Really just, you know, very standard sock. But I chose this to try out 2 at a time sock knitting. I'm a fan. I'm going to do that again. I'm not sure if I'll do this with every single sock that I make because I'm sure that there are some more complicated sock patterns that I would prefer focusing on 1 at a time. But for something as basic as these seed stitch socks that I want to make next, I think using the long cable sock needles to make them 2 at a time works for me. Oh, I haven't shown you the yarn that I want to use these for. And that is in my... Ooh, let's move aside a little bit. So this here is my... What do you call them? Not stash, scraps. This is where I have my scraps. And a lot of these scraps are sock yarn. So this is the yarn that I used for these socks. I don't know, you won't be able to tell. It looks very different. But like I said, that's just from the wear and tear of these. That's the yarn I was talking about. This is also a Lana Grossa sock yarn. I made a pair of socks for my mum from these. And she has tiny, tiny feet. A European shoe size of like 35 or 35 and a half, something like that. It's equivalent to like a UK size 2 or 2.5. Really very small feet. And so I have a lot of sock yarn left. And this is easily going to make a pair of shorty socks for myself. And I think this really pretty tweed is going to look really nice in the seed stitch. So I'm going to be casting these on next, and then I have a sock project on the go as well. I keep my sock projects in this crocheted container. Do you call it a bowl? Do you call it a bag? Anyway, it's a little crocheted thing that I made just from some leftover acrylic yarn, and that's where I keep my sock projects. So next time, hopefully I'll have finished either the Helia jumper or the crop top. Crop top's more likely, isn't it? Because there's still a lot to knit for the Helia jumper, especially when we get to the intricate sleeves. While I'm doing the body, I can just breeze through it, but when we get to the sleeves, I'm going to have to pay attention again. And I think that's still going to be a work in progress by the next time we see it. But I might have finished the crop top, and I'll certainly have started the socks, so you'll see those then. Incidentally, my yarn stash I keep in what I call my yarn greenhouse, because this is a little home greenhouse from IKEA, but instead of putting plants in there, I put yarns in there. And as you can see, it's not huge, but it's already bursting with my own yarn stash. So the intention is to not buy any yarns until I've got some more space in there. And then the scraps that I kept in here, kept in this box, which my mother said looks like a coffin. I don't think it does. And this is just a little box that I also found by the side of the street, because that's apparently where I get most of my possessions. If you're interested in other things that I'm planning to make this spring and summer, I did a whole separate video about that. That's not a podcast episode, and I'll link to that in the description box if you want to check out some of my summer knitting plans. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching. Bye!